Farnham telling a story about moving to California.
Well, a little here about our first trip when we first came out to California. They was Stella and I, and Pershing was a baby, and Irene and our mother. And we was in this old T-model Ford loaded down to the brim, had a big old trunk on the rack on the back, and quilts piled up in the back seat about 1.5 feet high, and the two big bedrolls on each side, and the suitcases on each side of the radiator. So we got over to this white mountain over there at Roswell, and this old Ford, it slowed down to a snail's pace and finally stopped, and there's a Mexican come along, and one of us was driving, the rest pushing. This Mexican, he put his rope on the saddle horn and to the old radiator cap, and happened to pull us up this mountain. And then I don't know if I'm going to get much on there. Then over there at the river, Colorado River, why Mama wanted to get across the river that night, and when we got across, there's a big bunch of chug holes in the road. Oh, they was terrible chug holes, and so she was carrying the lantern, wanted me to drive. Well, I was afraid she'd fall down and I'd run over her, so she got out and told me to take that lantern. She'd show me how to drive, and so she come raring up behind me in that car, and I got in a run. I was afraid I was going to fall down, and she was going to run over me, and so I'll tell you, I got out of the road and let her have the thing to herself, and she really showed me how to drive there a few minutes, I'll tell you. But anyway, we got on over there at Blythe and camped out, and so we had it pretty good over there fishing and getting fish out of a guy's fish trap over there. And finally, we went on down the river, and I spent a little time down there, about a week, you know. Trip from Portales, New Mexico to California. Stella and I traded a bunch of chickens to Gertrude and Forrest McCowan for this year old T-model 19 and 15 Ford. This Ford had an unusual thing about it. It had a wide tread, which very few people would believe until you got a stick and measured it for them. They made a few of these wide tread cars at that time, so they would fit the old timey wagon tracks, you know, when the roads wasn't so good. And I had ordered license for this old car, but they never did catch up with me. And we got ready to go to California. Why, Oakley let me have his license off of his Ford, and he also let me have his top, which was a good top. We didn't have no top. And we put his top on there and his license. And Mama, she bought some new tires. And one unusual thing to us was that when we got to California, we still had New Mexico air in them tires. And I was used to having a flat about every few miles, so that is something for us to think about, to carry some air that far without running out. But a short time, well, that was quite a while after I'd been in California. I traded this old car off to a guy, and so a couple of 3 months later, them license caught up with me, and I went down and took them license to him. And he looked at me first like he thought I was a crook, but he kept looking me over, and he decided that I was honest. So I don't know what he done with the license. He took them license and never said anything about it. This old car was really loaded down. We take and put banisters on both sides of the running boards, and that was all filled in with cooking utensils and first one thing and another. And Oakley, he killed a beef, and he gave us that beef, and we had that stored away in there. And we had a bunch of bedding and had that stacked up, and the quilts are stacked up in the back seat about 1.5 feet high. And we had mattresses in our beds, and these two big bed rolls one for us and one for Mom and Irene, and they went up on top of that on the sides of the car, had to tie them on. And when you got in and out, why, you had to climb over these beds, of course. And then on the rear end, I had a rack, and we had a great big trunk. And on top of this trunk, we had a wash tub where we carried dirty clothes and baby clothes and one thing and another. And they was two big suitcases across the front of the car, across the radiator there, and that was quite a load there. The first day we made 90 miles. That was down to Roswell, New Mexico, and we thought we done very good. We didn't start off too early. And Mama, she wanted me to drive around and look for a place to stay. It is real cold. I think she is a real good manager. I don't know if we'd have made it or not without her. But anyway, while we run onto a vacant house, and she went over and talked to the woman next door. And this woman let her have the house for 50 cents that night, and we slept in that house. The next morning, of course, we had a little trouble getting started. Always had to jack up a hind wheel and heat water, and before you could get this old cart cranked. And so we had to heat the brick. We had a bunch of brick. We'd always heat them up and put them down in the bottom of the car for Mama to put her feet on. Our next stop was Santa Patricia, New Mexico, where our sister Jessie used to teach school at. She stayed with a Spanish family there, and from Roswell to Santa Patricia, we had to go up this, what they call the White Mountain. And this old Ford, it got slower and slower, and it finally gave up the ghost on the way up this mountain there. And we was trying to push it, one to drive and the rest of us are pushing, and there's a Mexican come along and horseback. So he put his rope on the saddle horn and tied onto the old car, and he'd go along pulling this old car, and the rest of us pushing. So that is quite a deal, getting up this mountain. The name of the people there at Santa Patricia, where Jessie taught school, and also where we stayed all night that night, their name was Mr. and Mrs. Gonzalez. Between San Patricio and El Paso, we came upon a big sand bed where they was working on the road. And they had a team of horses there where they had to tow everybody through this sand. It must have been a quarter of a mile through there, and the people would line up and take turns being towed through. And there was one guy, he drove up there in a great big Cadillac, looked like he had a lot of money, and he didn't want to wait his turn. So he pulled out around everybody, and he was going to show us how to get through that sand. Well, he got out there not very many yards, and he got stuck clear up to the bed of the car. And so this guy that was towing him across, he just ignored him, left him out there. He really did raise Cain. He pulled through a whole bunch of cars after that guy's turn, so I guess he learned a good lesson there. Our next stop was at a ghost town on our way down to El Paso there, and there wasn't nobody lived in this town, and we didn't have no trouble finding a house, because all you had to do was just drive up and down the street and pick out the house that you wanted to stay in. From there, we made it into El Paso, Texas. Irene, she was greatly impressed about the size of the town there in El Paso. We bought gas there, and I was asked about the road, and this guy told us to go out there a ways and make a turn to the left out there, and then go till we run into a brick wall. After we left El Paso, we had a little pavement there, and that's the first pavement that this old car had ever seen before. And we got up on that pavement and get going about 35 miles an hour. And them wheels, of course, they was all loose, and that old car would get to shimmying, and we didn't know what was the matter. That thing would darn near throw you out of the car. So I finally stopped and went over to a garage, and this guy, he told me what the trouble was. He said them there tires were just loose on there. Why, that is the reason. It took us about 2 more days to get on up to Rincon, New Mexico. The road went a lot different them days, and we went around through some mountains there. So you don't go very far in T-model Ford in the mountains. Some of them small mountains is pretty big them days for an old T-model Ford. So we finally reached Rincon, New Mexico. When we got to Rincon, I think it was a little bit before night, and Mama, she went and phoned Georgie and Ed up at Hot Springs, and they came down. The road was mountainous, and we figured we couldn't make it up there. I don't remember just how far it was. But they got down there, and so Stella and Irene and Georgie, they went down the railroad track and picked up some coal there, and we cooked a steak. Well, they cooked some of this steak that we brought from New Mexico with some of this beef that Oakley killed over there. And I remember one little incident. Mama cooked this here steak in a Dutch oven, this little old stove in this camp house we had a Dutch oven. So that's where she cooked the steak. And another incident, Georgia Lee, she had the earache there, and I remember about Ed Jones blowing smoke in her ear there. When we left Rincon, well, Ed Jones, he went with us quite a few miles out there to show us a dirt road to cut across to Deming, New Mexico. And that's where we stayed all night on our next night on our trip. When we got ready to leave Deming, why, the fan belt kept running off this old car, and I had to get a stick and put a guide on there, and I had to keep that on there the rest of the trip, keep this fan belt from running off with us all the time, running off. And the next night, why, we made it over to Lordsburg, New Mexico. Lordsburg, New Mexico was one about the coldest places that we had on the trip, I think. We always called it Iceberg after that, and we sure like to froze out, and we had to buy a cord of wood, and next morning, why, we couldn't crank this old car. We jacked up the hind wheel and poured in hot water and done everything else, but it was about noon before we ever got this old car started. Mama always inquired about the roads on this trip, and to be sure to take the best road and the roads with the smallest hills. And so she found out we needed to go south towards the Mexican border, and that we went down to a town called Douglas. That's an old army camp down there. And when we got to Douglas, why, they had a camp there for tourists, and we rented one of these Indian teepees there. I remember we had to sleep with our feet to the center, and when we was cooking breakfast, they had a kind of a kitchen place there in this camp, and where you'd put in a quarter, and it'd turn the gas on for a certain period of time. And I remember when we was getting our meals over there, why, somebody else had a little gas left over, you know. If they had to put in another quarter and didn't use it all, why, we'd run over with our coffee pot or pan, set it on there, and use the rest of that there gas up. The next stop we made after we left Douglas was a little railroad siding. There was a little bitty teeny depot there, and it was real cold, and Mama, she had quite a time talking this guy into letting us sleep in the depot, but she finally got the best of him. She talked him down because we had Pershing, you know, as a baby and all, and he let us sleep in this here depot, and this here where we slept was only about 3 or 4 feet from where the train went along, and it'd feel like it was about to raise you out of the bed when one of them freight trains would come along. After this, why, we slept out every night, and we had a wagon sheet, and we'd fit that up against the side of the car and slope it down. Well, that is where Mama and Irene slept in there. And I took an axe and cut both sides of the front seat down so I could lean it back. And that is where me and Stella slept. That is a real palace in there, because that really made a bed. We used to take and hang the lantern up in there and go to bed, and we was out of the rain. We thought that was really something fine to be able to do that. I put a hook and eye on this here seat that I chopped down so I could snap it back up, and So that worked out pretty good. If you'd cut the back seat of a car down now, like I did on that one, and bend it back and forth about 3 or 4 days, why it'd break off because the metal ain't no good anymore like it used to be. The next place we came to was Bisbee, Arizona. There was quite a mountain there. I think that was the highest we went. I remember that Mama had a little trouble breathing up there on account of the high altitude, so she didn't know what was the cause of it. We stopped at the foot of the mountain there to get gas, and we asked the man about this mountain. We'd been hearing about it, and he told us that we'd go up 1,000 feet in a mile. So we was really looking for a hill there. Didn't know whether we was going to make it or not, but when we was going through this town, we was going up the hill all the time and didn't know it. So we stopped and rested the car up this hill a ways, and there was a man up there had a brand new car, and so he was stalled up there, and he thought it was something terrible. He said he knew there wasn't nothing wrong with his car, but he didn't know that he was climbing this hill, I guess. So he had to go to a garage, but we went right on by him, and pretty soon we got out to the edge of the town, and we looked up, and it wasn't but just, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards to the top of the hill, and so we just scooted right on up the hill and low, and made it up there pretty good. After we left Bisbee, Arizona, we had to go down quite a mountain there. And I never had been used to driving in the mountains, so I used my brake too much and burnt the brakes off. Well, then I got to using the reverse, and I finally burned it all off. My hair was sticking straight up, and I was pretty much scared. And Mama told me to run the thing into the side of the mountain, but it was going a little too fast. I told Irene to jump out and throw some rocks under the wheel, and so finally we got to a place where this road was a little bit more level, and I got to rubbing the side of the mountain. Finally got it slowed down, and we stopped there. As a man come by while we had stopped there, and he wanted to ask us what our trouble was, and we told him our brakes and all reverse and everything was all burnt off of the car, and he told me just to put the car in low and I could make it on down the mountain. Well, the worst part of the grade was over, so we made it down the mountain okay. We came on down to where there was a little town down at the foot of the mountains there, and stayed all night, and next morning, we put the brakes on the car. The next place we arrived was Phoenix, Arizona, and we looked for some people that Mama knew there, but we couldn't find them. And we was going right down the main street of Phoenix there in Arizona, and this old fan belt, it finally come off and flew around in there and hit the hood, and I guess I killed the car, but I thought it had blowed out, and we thought that was the end of our journey right there. We was looking for work, and somebody told us to go over to Glendale. Well, we went over there, but we didn't find any work over there, and somebody told us to go back to Temple, which was not very far away. And the only work we could find was picking cotton. So this man there had a lot of cotton. He gave us a job, and we moved into a little tent. He had a row of little tents there, and that's where we lived, in one of them little tents. And we picked cotton for this man there for, maybe a week, I don't know. I remember that is the first time he ever tried to say anything. He tried to say chicken, because these chickens was always getting in the tent, and we'd have to run them out and holler at the chicken. So he's trying to say chicken, but he couldn't quite make it. And so we was there on Christmas Day at this place, and we was picking cotton down there one time out of this long staple cotton. And you had to bend them stalks over. They was about 6-7 feet high, and you'd bend them over. Well, when you turn them loose, they'd come back, like a bow and an arrow. And I was right behind Irene, and she turned one of them stalks loose, and that stalk come back, one of them green bows on there hit me in the eye, and like just about knocked me out. I could see stars and everything else. While we was at this place picking cotton, I made a few dollars there, and I told this man I want to put some oversized piston in this old car. This man, he brought me out some oversized pistons, but they was too small. They had to be bigger than that yet, so he went back, couldn't get any bigger ones, but he got me some tractor pistons, and I put them in there. One of them was a little bit tight. It's the one that hadn't froze up, but it worked in all right, though. These here pistons and cost me $13. Mama and Irene went down the road there to get some milk for Pershing, and they passed an olive tree down there, and Mama tasted one of those olives, and she seen the man there. She asked him if she could get a few of them to take back to camp to play a trick on some of us back there. And so when she got back, why, she gave me one of them olives, you know, and she had a hard time keeping her face straight while I was chewing on that olive. I tell you, that sure was some flavor. Here in Phoenix, and there in Phoenix was the first time that any of us had ever seen any oranges growing on a tree. And Mama, she wanted to get a few of them oranges, and she went and seen the lady, and the lady told her she would clip her off a few, but Mama wanted to pick them herself, so she did. She picked off a few while the lady was clipping, and she sent those oranges to Georgia. When we left Phoenix, why, we come out to a little town, just, not many miles this side of Phoenix. That's where the road forks are. One of these roads went to Yuma, and the other one went on what they call a Blythe cutoff. And we had to look at them roads a long time before we could figure which one to take. I think Mama finally decided that we would try the Blythe cutoff. This man told us we took plenty of water with us and bought some new canteens and filled them with water, and we broke down out there, we'd be towed in. Otherwise, why, we'd just be stalled out there. And this, at Yassahampa, they told a story there about if you drank any of that water there at Yassahampa, why, you never would tell the truth anymore. Our next stop was over at a place called Vicksburg, there in Arizona. And we drove up there, and as soon as I drove up this little old place, I seen a railroad outfit there. It looked like a bridge gang or something, so I told him I was going to try to get a job there, and so I asked him where the boss was, and they said he was standing down there in the door of one of them cars. And I went down there, and he gave me a job, and so we went out to look for a place to stay, and we was looking around. We found an old schoolhouse out to the edge of town, had a lot of cottonseed in it, so we decided to camp there, and so we did. And we kind of taken that place over there, and we slept on them cottonseed there, and there's some bums come in. They tried to run us out of there, said we took over their bed there, and so one morning there, there's finally some Mexicans come by there, and they had to wait a week for some car parts from Los Angeles. So one morning, why, we always cook flapjacks, and so I told him that was pretty good. And we had flapjacks, and these Mexicans had a Dutch oven. They'd made themselves some hot biscuits, and I just felt kind of funny. I didn't know which one of us was a Mexican there for a while. And I worked for this bridge gang outfit there, I think about a week and a half, something like that. And I had to board down there and in order to get a job, and I used to slip pieces of cake in my pocket and take them to Pershing there. And I think this place where we was camped up there was kind of a bum's headquarters, because they kept coming up there, you know, begging for so much that I finally had to run them off. And this year bridge gang, they was going to move, you know, and that they was going the opposite direction. This man told me if I wanted to drive back over there, you know, I could still work, but we was going the other way. So we left there and come on to Blythe. When we got over to the Colorado River on our way to Blythe, why, you had to cross the river there on a barge. They charge you $2.50 to take your car across the river there. I remember that was just an old flat barge, and they had a 2x4 nailed along the edge, and I had to drive right up against that 2x4. They told us there about a car or two drove off in the river, so that kind of made my hair stand up a little bit there. And but Mama, she wanted to go on across. We wanted to wait till morning, but she was anxious to get into California, so we were the last one. This guy, he took us on across. Well, when we got across this river there, why, there was a great big dump throwed up. It was a brand new road, and I tell you, that was full of chug holes like nobody's business, and it was really something. It had got dark on us, and these old magneto lights, they wasn't no good to see out ahead with, so Mama told me to drive the car, and she'd take this lantern and walk ahead, and this here place was about, maybe a quarter of a mile long, a terrible road, and so she was walking on, and I was kind of staying behind with this car, afraid I'd run over, and all them chug holes. So she kind of got peeved up and come back and told me to take that lantern, and she'd show me how to drive that car. So I took this lantern and started on down the road, and boy, here she comes, coming right on down in behind me, and she was scaring the wadding out of me. I'd run into them chug holes, and she was about to run over me, and finally, I just left the road and let her have it, and we found a place to camp after we got across the river there, and next day I went down there. I seen an outfit down there making a levee on the Colorado River, and I wanted to get some work there for a little while, and this man told me that they was going to move on down the river into a place called Palo Verde, and if I wanted to wait and come on down there, why, he'd give me a job when I got down there. So we just camped right there for about a week. And in the meantime, we met a Swede there that was camped out on the river for his health. And he used to come over to the camp, and he'd play with Pershing at night there in the campfire, and he'd hold him up, and it'd be moonlight, and he'd say, "See the moon, see the moon?" And he told Mama that he was fishing over there in the river, and they got to talking about fish, and she got talking about salmon. He said he was going to catch her a salmon. So we met this same Swede in a cotton patch up in Porterville, and that is after we had lived in Corona several years, and then we moved to Porterville. We went on down to Palo Verde, and I started to work down there for this outfit, and driving 4 mules in Fresno, where they were working on that there levee there, and boy, it sure was cold. We was camped out there, and person he had the colic, and Irene and Stella and Mama, they had to go out and haul in wood, to build a fire there to keep him warm, and I tell you, we like froze out there. And another little incident there down on that levee was a place where it was real steep going up over a canal there, and this Ford, you'd get it cranked and start up over there, and the thing would stop, and I'd back down and jack up a wheel. When I jacked the wheel up, why, it'd get gas in the carburetor, and I don't know how many times I ever tried that before I found out I didn't have enough gas in the car to get over that bump there. If you turned one of them T-model Fords around and backed up a hill, why, you wouldn't run out of gasoline. It'd feed the carburetor. They'd had a flood down there on the Colorado River, and that's where we was building that dike up down there, and we visited some little houses and little shacks around there, and these people had left out, and they'd just left their dishes sitting right on the table. We was talking to a man down there about picking lemons, and he'd been on down here in this part of California, and he advised us that we ought to just turn right around and go back to New Mexico. And Mama asked him if there wasn't any lemons or fruit to pick out there, and if there wasn't a lot of fruit work. And he said, they're picking a few lemons out there and painting them yellow and selling them. While we were at Palo Verde there was a man that had a big seine, stretched out across one of those sloughs there, and he'd go down there every morning and go out in the boat and take these fish out of his nets, and they was a kind of a fish. He didn't like them or didn't want them. I guess they wouldn't sell. They call them buffalo fish, and he'd just sling them fish out on the bank. I think Mama asked him about getting fish, and so he'd just sling them fish out there, and so we really eat the fish there, got all the fish we wanted, and Mama made a net and put it down there, and she used to put a little food in it, and she used to catch a lot of fish in that net, and we'd eat them too. After we left Palo Verde and started on down this way, we stayed with a cowboy. We camped out there, and he told us about Desert Center down there, And he said that man down there that run that filling station at Desert Center was selling water. And he told us not to pay for any water down there. But anyway, you had to buy gas there at Desert Center because you couldn't make it across there. And that was a real sandy road. And when you left, I bought some gas there at Desert Center and some light bulbs. And this man, I don't know, I think he charged us about 50 cents a gallon for this gas, but he forgot to charge me for the light bulbs. So I took off and never paid him. Well,